Hello everybody and welcome to the round glass review for the Schneider-Kreuznach D-Xenon, but we're actually going to be doing the SMC Pentax-D FA 100mm f2.8 macro. They are the same lens. Alright, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Because it was also available badged Schneider, I'm going to assume that it was made by Schneider. Schneider has a long history of making lenses for other companies, so it seems fitting that this would probably be the case. It is called the SMC Pentax-D FA. We'll take that apart. SMC is super multi-coated. Pentax-D indicates that this lens came out in the digital era. FA is their full frame designation, 100mm focal length, f2.8 maximum aperture, macro. And guys, guess what? We have an actual macro lens here, not a close-up lens wearing a macro mask and hoping no one will notice. This lens was made from 2004 until 2009 and replaced by the weather-resistant version, WR, which uses the same optics. Typical lens uses for this will include macros. I know, that's shocking, isn't it? And by that, I also mean actual true macros in lens, which is nice. But more importantly, this lens is going to be a stunning portrait lens, as short telemacros almost always are. Product photos, detail images, and some wildlife images can also be taken quite well with this lens. In fact, if I'm going to be completely honest, I've used this lens for a lot of different things over the years. It's never given me something that I would say, don't do this. It handles everything beautifully, and as we go through this video, I think you're going to see why. For your bottom line up front, Pentax has had 6 distinct versions of the 100mm f2.8 lens dating back to 1985. The lens database link in the video description can take you down the research rabbit hole because the optical design evolution of this lens spec is interesting, to say the least. This lens, specifically, seems to have been made by Schneider, or at least there is a Schneider-branded version of it, and in keeping with Schneider lenses, it's incredible. By the way, if you've ever wondered who I think makes the best lenses, it's Schneider. And having Schneider lenses from as new as this one to as old as a 1925 Dasacar, the only company out there I think has ever given them a run for their money was Goers. Anyway, that ought to set the tone and tempo for a review of what is the single best lens I've ever used from an optical performance perspective. And guys, seriously, if you doubt that, just jump right to the Seidel analysis section right now. If there were one thing that Ricoh should change about this lens, give it 9 aperture blades, not 8. Doing some extensive research, which included about 7 minutes on Pentax forums, the focal length and angle of view are 100mm and 24.4 degrees on full frame, 152.5mm and 16 degrees on APS-C. The aperture range is 2.8 through 32. Element and group count are 9 and 8. The design type is Xenon, with a floating element for aberration correction. Xenons are an asymmetric lens based on the double Gauss design, and were also the precursor of the Ultron and, fun fact, have been around in various forms since 1920. The filter size is 49mm, closest focus is 0.13 meters, which, in the US, Liberia, and Myanmar, is a measurement that proves the US is an amazingly great company about its dogmatic adherence to an arcane and needlessly confusing measurement system. The drive type is autofocus with in-camera motor-powered screw drive. The native mount is Pentax K. Dimensions are 67.5mm by 80.5mm. Weight is 345 grams. Macro lenses are one of those lenses that should be in your toolkit. This one, especially, is also a stunning portrait lens owing to the focal length. For my second tip, I'll say this for every macro lens in this series from now until the end of time. Clean your sensor. No, clean it more than that. Seriously, do you think that's all it needs? Great, go take a dust reference photo now because there's still a lot of dust on your sensor and this lens wants to show it to you. Next up, for this lens, a macro adapter doesn't do a whole lot if you shoot it on mirrorless. You can already reach 1:1 in lens, and the added macro adapter throw, let's call it about 30mm, doesn't add 30% to your magnification. It adds maybe a handful of percent. I really didn't sit down to calculate that. I did try this lens with the macro adapter, and I found the added throw gave me nothing that I really wanted or needed. Lastly, with this lens, like all macro lenses, If you want to shoot close and have suitable depth of field, you need light or speed. Fortunately, modern DSLRs have good high sensitivity performance, but some macro lights will also help with this lens when using it for macro work. All right, I am very excited about this section for this video. For this Seidel analysis, we're going to go straight to the dots test chart because I expected this lens to be good, but I am really excited to share these results. Okay, in a nutshell, if any lens ever outperforms this lens on this test, I will be shocked. These results are as close to perfect as I think lens results can be. Let's start going around the photo. Here's a 100% crop of the center dots, which exhibit no flaws. Period. That alone is incredible. But I want to zoom in on the centermost dots to 400% magnification for you. Verify that statement for yourself that there's no flaws. I mean, this is functionally perfect. Here is what the vector file of this image looks like at 400%. The softness, big air quotes around softness, on the photographed center dots is likely due to the image resolution reduction on my 4K monitor versus the Pentax K1 sensor. Before we go any further, I want to impress upon you that the test photo I took was shot wide open. I'll let that hit for a moment before we take a look at the corners. Let's still go around each corner, and here in the top left we see dots that look at 100% crop, almost identical to the dots in the center. But are they? Let's zoom to 400%. Looks like there may be a hint of mechanical vignette that's interfering with the shape of these slightly soft corner dots. In the top right, we see the worst performing corner in this lens. But is this lens actually performing this badly, or was my 36-inch monitor about a millimeter off plane at that corner? The world will never know, but let's see what happens at 400% and how badly this corner performs. So this test photo was taken on the Pentax K1 and its 36 megapixel sensor. On that sensor, the dots in this test chart are 8 pixels by 8 pixels with this lens and where it was placed in relationship to the monitor. If you count the pixels and the slight glow around the ones in the center dots, those pixels go from being 8 by 8 to 15 pixels diagonally. This dot right here in the far upper right corner has a little bit of astigmatism smear, and it extends to 21 pixels diagonally. And the actual square, by the way, is still identifiable as an 8 by 8 block in the middle. That, by the way, 15 to 21 diagonal pixels is such an inconsequential difference. An item in a corner may be 3.5 pixels blurrier than the same item at the image center when shot wide open. You know what? We're going to call that performance functionally perfect. So let's cut here to the bottom right, and we can see more dots that look like the center. I'll skip the 400% crop this time, but you can trust me that the dot in the right corner there, the very far right bottom, exhibits only 3 pixels total of added blur versus the middle dot in this image. Here on the bottom left, we see the second worst performing dot, and it's halfway between the dots in the bottom and top right in terms of performance. So again, incredible performance. I don't know that humans could design a lens with more perfect technical performance than this one exhibits. One aspect of this lens that helps explain why it performs so well is the floating element system. The way that this lens's elements shift so that the distances between them adjust as the focus moves does a lot to correct aberrations. This lens is, empirically, the best performing lens I've tested yet. And quick spoiler, I got bored one day a few months back and took test photos for every single lens I have on the docket from now until the middle of 2026. That's about 80 lenses. This one, handily and without a close second, performed the best from a technical perfection perspective of all of them. Breathing is, and this will not be a surprise, a factor of focal distance. In addition to the stills, here are 2 similar shots taken at slightly different distances. In the second, closer shot, breathing is more noticeable over the 0.7 meter range because the lens is closer. the focus throw greater to achieve the focus transition, and the magnification also greater. Breathing, as we know, stems from a relationship of the entrance pupil, the front element, to the subject and focus throw distance. This is, I think, a neat way to show that. Aperture is stepped in half-stop increments on the ring, but can be controlled in third-stop increments on Pentax cameras with aperture control. The front element is non-rotating, but does move in and out 47.5 millimeters, which, by the way, is fascinating, and I suspect a feature deriving from the floating element system, or at minimum, the elements on the right side of the aperture blades in the diagram. In traditional lens design, where all elements move in a single mass away from the focal plane with your imaging media to achieve focus closer than infinity, a 100 millimeter lens, which focuses 100 millimeters from the imaging media at infinity, would need to be focused 200 millimeters from the imaging media to reach a magnification of 1:1. Every time the focal length is added to the focus distance, magnification increases. So 300 millimeters of focus in this example is twice life size, and 400 millimeters is 3 times life size, as an example for concept demonstration. I find this lens's performance and design fascinating because reaching 1:1 requires less than 50 millimeters of throw. That's less than half of the focal length. So, as a quick sidebar, nicely done, Schneider engineers, on designing this lens. This feature of this lens is one of the many utility aspects that makes it fantastic to use because it doesn't actually double in length to reach 1:1 magnification. The focus throw is roughly 290 degrees. Testing this with a lens that has a window for the focusing scales is a bit tricky, so it may actually be a few degrees more or less than that. The focus ring is stationary, wide, and coated with a very pleasant rubber grip. Focus damping is, in keeping with screw-drive AF lenses, only okay. There's no play in the ring, but the vibration of the AF gears does translate when manually focusing quickly. The autofocus effect on audio is present if you use on-camera audio. This lens has somewhat quiet focusing gears, but if you are making a video of a macro subject and using on-camera audio, the gear whine and the motor of your Pentax camera's in-camera screw drive motor will be on your audio track. As a heads up, this lens performed amazingly across every category in this section. There's not going to be anything to complain about here. Sharpness, it's the best of any lens I've ever used when looking corner to corner. Build quality is good, but if there were one weakness in this lens, build quality would be the first one I would look at. This lens uses a lot of plastic construction in the portions that move to adjust focus. One build quality item I would change on this is that of the focus clamp. It holds the lens in place, and it slips if I accidentally move focus, both of which are good, and the latter of which prevents damage to the mechanism. But the switch itself feels a little flimsy. Contrast is exceptional, as the film images in this video indicate. Also, the colors that this lens delivers are absolutely rich and stunning. Aperture stars are nice and appear around f11, but really peak at apertures smaller than f16. The stars from this lens are clearly defined with good points, and that's pretty much what I want in that regard. Out of focus areas are mixed. The aperture shape can, at some apertures, lead to some chaotic backgrounds. At wider apertures, backgrounds are okay, but not remarkable. That said, this lens is not one which would have, I don't think, been intended to deliver exceptional background image quality. This is more of a technical lens focused on image precision. Distortion is effectively perfect. There could be a hint of mustache distortion along the top and bottom, but that could also be that the graph paper wasn't perfectly flat. I tend to think it was the latter. Light loss is very slight wide open, even slighter at f4, and gone by f5.6, never returning at any other aperture either. Now, as a note on the test photos in this section, I did forget to test them all at f32. That's on me, but the performance is not meaningfully different between f32 and f22. Flare and ghosting never manifested for me in any image at all, so I can't tell you how they are. Balance with cameras is fine for larger cameras. This lens does not feel at home on small mirrorless bodies, but But on a Pentax-K camera, film or digital, or on heavier mirrorless bodies like my A7S II or the A7 IV, it balances very well. This video has relatively few sample shots, I know. Only 76 made it to the folder for use. But of all the lenses I own, there is only one lens that you've seen more photos from on this channel. Why? Because this is the lens that I use to digitize all my 120 and sheet film negatives. Every medium format and large format image you've seen on this channel was digitized by this lens. So why is this second? My 80mm Rodagon is the lens I use for 35mm negatives, and there have simply been more of those on this channel. This is an amazing lens, and it shows what a lens of exceptional design and exceptional technical precision can do. The images it captures carry no character from the lens into the images. This lens simply delivers stunning sharpness on the whole frame, incredible contrast, and vibrant colors. This lens is strictly business. You have something you needed to do, and it does so in a manner that far exceeds expectations. As a lens for macro work, I've not met this lens's equal. As a lens for technically precise portraits, I've not met this lens's equal. As a lens for tabletop studio work and product photography, say it with me, I've not met this lens's equal. If you wanted a single short tele lens to do all the work that a short tele can do, this lens should be the first on your list to look at. Add to that the 1:1 macro capacity and exceptional working distance, neither too short nor too far, for macro work, and what you have is an all-purpose short tele lens that can be expected to do everything you want with perfection. If there's a lens on the market which is better designed from either a technical or image-making perspective than this one, I'm unaware of it.